In the month of August, a party of Hessians and Tories, under the command of Colonel Friedrich Baum, approached Bennington in order to burn the town. A corps of New Hampshire militia under General Stark had recently arrived at Bennington. Being informed of the approach of the Hessian forces, Stark sent out a call for the militia, and for Colonel Warner, who was encamped at Manchester 6 miles away. The militia turned out in Vermont and Massachusetts, and some of us from Connecticut. Baum began to entrench on the 14th of August and requested reinforcements from British General John Burgoyne. Lieutenant Colonel Brayman, with his regiment of Brunswick Grenadiers and Infantry, was sent to assist Baum, but he was delayed by rains and by the rough road. Similar causes would also prevent Colonel Warner from reaching Bennington at the start of the battle. I departed as soon as I heard the alarm, and I joined up with Colonel Simmons' Berkshire militia, which was hastily assembled with volunteers from across New England. The next day, the 16th of August, we met with General Stark and approached the enemy. Captain Enos Parker of Connecticut, with Lieutenants Kilbourne and Cook of the Massachusetts militia, selected a company of us to march across the river. We traveled in a circuitous route of about 5 or 6 miles, mostly through woods, with all possible silence. We came to the enemy's rear line at the edge of the woods and formed ranks on the right, and there, pursuant to orders, sat in silence until a signal of 2 musket shots was given. Our army charged at the British encampment from 3 sides in a simultaneous attack. We made a rush at the British entrenchments, but they received us with boldness. The battle immediately became chaotic and desperate, each American fighting according to his own discretion. The fighting continued for about 2 hours in close combat, without form or regularity. Eventually the entrenchments were scaled, and we began to pour in on every side. The Indians, British, Canadians, and Tories fled into the woods, but the German dragoons still continued to fight. When they exhausted their ammunition, they charged ferociously, leading to more hand-to-hand combat with swords, bayonets, and muskets used as clubs in a desperate struggle for survival. When we held the line, the Germans realized they were routed. The surviving enemies who had not escaped began to surrender one by one. Colonel Baum, being mortally wounded, was among the prisoners taken. With some of the enemy running to escape, Colonel Herrick of the Green Mountain Rangers rode along near where I was and cried out, "Follow me!" Ah! So another soldier and I ran after him for about 2 miles to Rambler's Mills. Suddenly, Herrick wheeled his horse and fired. He'd spotted the British reinforcements coming. Herrick rode back to alert General Stark. My companion and I had fallen behind Herrick's horse and run out of breath, hid behind a haystack, and rested until we could see the British army approaching. We stood up, fired at the enemy, and then ran for our lives. The enemy returned the fire by the discharge of a 6-pounder, which gave a general alarm to the rest of the Americans in the field. We then ran together and formed about a mile southwest of the entrenchments and faced the reinforcements. But the Americans, in pursuing those who had escaped from the earlier battle, had become scattered and fatigued. Only a few assembled at first, but more soldiers kept falling in until a line was formed along a fence on the northeast side of the meadow at the edge of the woods. The British army formed a line in the meadow extending across the road, and the firing commenced as soon as they came within musket shot. Under heavy fire, we were forced to retreat from tree to tree, firing as we ran, until we came to a log fence along the ravine. With no more ground to give, we came to a halt and made our last stand. The firing continued for some time without cessation, but before the enemy could break through, Colonel Warner arrived with the remains of his regiment. His artillery officers took over one of the field pieces from the first engagement and formed on the right of our party. At about the same time, an old man mounted upon a black mare, brandishing a Queen Anne's iron sword, arrived with 90 men and filed in front of our company. Just as the old man had got his men to the spot and halted, his mare was killed. He jumped down on a large white oak stump. Captain Parker, seeing the old man's company between him and the enemy, ordered us to file in between the reinforcements. I then heard a tremendous crash up in the woods at the right wing of the American troops, which was followed by a most terrible yell. The booming voice of Colonel Warner thundered, "Charge!" Then the old man on the stump cried out, "Charge!" and jumped from the stump and ran towards the enemy. His men, some of them with bayonets, followed suit and rushed upon the enemy with all their might. The enemy reinforcements took to their heels and were completely routed. As we came up to the enemy's line, we captured their field piece, whirled it about to face the retreating soldiers and opened fire. The blast overtook them before they had run 50 yards and mowed them down in large numbers. Those of us who were not too fatigued surrounded, killed, or captured the remaining enemies. The number of Hessians taken was about 700. The battle had reduced Burgoyne's army in size, led his Indian support to largely abandon him, and deprived him of much-needed supplies. Not long after, Burgoyne came on with his army, but his progress was stopped at Saratoga by the brave General Gates, with a small body of standing troops and a large body of militia. They had some warm engagements, but Burgoyne, with all of his army, was compelled to surrender as prisoners of war on the 17th of October, 1777. It was the greatest American victory and a turning point in the war. At about the same time, the British shipping came up the North River as far as Catskill. But hearing that Burgoyne had surrendered, they retreated downriver to New York. If they had rushed on and not stopped to burn the town of Esopus, the Americans would have been defeated. These successes had a wonderful effect on reviving our spirits and inspiring us with hope and energy. After all this, the militia finally had a small respite.